All right, welcome back to the third part of One Man's Faith today. We're looking at the names of God, and as I said, we've looked at Elohim, we've looked at Adonai, and we are looking at Yahweh, His real name, and what that means. The I Am. The I Am. He is constant. He is always there. He is independent. He is not dependent on anything. He was in the beginning. He will be at the end. Even if everything else fell apart, God would be God. He would be Yahweh. He would be Yahweh. Now, I want to look at another name. This is another name that comes up. This is in Genesis 22. God had come to Abraham and said, I want you to take your son, your only son, and I want you to go to where I tell you to go, and I want you to sacrifice him. In other words, make him a burnt offering. It's not just that he was going to kill him. He was to put him on an altar and make him a burnt offering. And so in verse 9, it says, and they came to the place which God had told him, and Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood and bound his son Isaac. Now, hear this. Isaac was probably 30 to 33 when this happened. And he allowed his dad to bind him and put him on this altar. But the angel of the Lord, laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Abraham stretched out his hand and took his knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. And he said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered the ram up for the burnt offering in the place of his son. Abraham called the name of the place Jehovah Yireh, or as we say, as we butcher it, so to speak, Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide. As it is said this day, in the mount of the Lord it will be provided. So Yahweh Yireh means the Lord will provide. Yireh is the future tense form of the verb raha. Okay? Raha means to see. And so used in its future tense, it would be you will see. Okay, now Yahweh has been made into a noun. I guess you want to call it a participle. And the form is roeh, which means a seer, S-E-E-R, a seer. A seer is a prophet who sees rather than hears. Okay? Prophets can have two forms. One is they hear something said to them by God, or they see something said to them by God. I mean, so if you're one of those people that has visions, that sees things, that's all right. That's all right. God speaks both ways. Samuel was a seer. In 1 Samuel 9, verse 9, it said, formerly in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, he used to say, come, let us go to the seer. For he who is called a prophet now was formerly called a seer. So seers see more than they hear. They have visions. They see things. And they speak it out. So the term used there, a seer, comes from raha, to see. So it's one who see. God will see. And in some places, like in our case here, Yireh means to provide. Which, if you look at will see, then he will provide, because he sees, he will provide. And so provision, even in the Latin, is made up of two words that mean to see beforehand. To see beforehand. So God sees in the situation beforehand and is able to provide for your need. Jehovah Jireh, or I'll just go ahead and say Jehovah Jireh, my provider. And we sing a song, Jehovah Jireh, my provider, his grace is sufficient for me. It is. He will provide. And Abraham knew this. As a matter of fact, in Genesis 22, verses 7 and 8, as they were approaching the mountain, Isaac says, Father, he said, behold, we have fire, we have the wood, but where's the lamb for this burnt offering? He knew what they were going up to do. They were going up to make an offering. And Abraham said, this is before he named the place, he said, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. So the two of them walked together. Hebrews tells us that Abraham knew because God had promised him. God had promised him. I don't know if you remember this, but up until this point, God told him for about 25 years, he says, you're gonna have a son. Listen, you're gonna be the father of a multitude. And he says, listen, it's not gonna be Ishmael. You're gonna be blessed, and the nations will be blessed through the son that you and Sarah are gonna have. And he had to wait for that son. As a matter of fact, when God and the two angels came as they were getting ready to go to Sodom and Gomorrah, he stopped by Abraham and he told Abraham, he said, in a year, you will have a son. And so God provided the son. They had the son. They named him Isaac. Then later, God wanted to make sure that this was really the guy that he had called, Abraham. And the Bible says, I think at the beginning of chapter 22, that God tested Abraham. And he went to Abraham and said, Abraham, I want you to take your only son to where I tell you, and I want you to sacrifice him. And there was no hesitation. There was nothing is written about, but God, this is the one you told me. How can you take this from me? There was nothing like that. He said, yes, Lord. And he and Isaac and a couple of their servants headed from where they were and went to what is called Mount Moriah. And Mount Moriah is where Jerusalem sits. And they got close, and that's where Isaac, actually the servants stayed there. Abraham and Isaac got down, took the fire and the wood, and headed off to the top of that mountain. And Isaac said, hey, Dad, we have wood, we have fire, but where's the sacrifice? And that's where Abraham says, God will provide the lamb. And Hebrews says that Abraham knew because God promised that even if he sacrificed Isaac, God would raise him from the dead. Because God had promised, and Yahweh doesn't change. He doesn't change his mind. If he promises you that you're going to have a son, then you will have a son. If he tells you that that son is going to be the start of great nations, then he will be the start of great nations. So there's no way that God is going to go back on his promise. And this is what Abraham knew. Jehovah Jireh, my provider. Throughout the Bible, God is provider. Throughout the Bible, God is provider. In Psalms 78, verse 20, it says, behold, he struck the rock so that the waters gushed out. Now, this is, Psalm 78 is really a reiteration of the 40-year period listed in Numbers. And it says, he struck the rock so that the waters gushed out and streams were overflowing. Can he give bread also? Will he provide meat for his people? These were actually questions asked by the people of Israel. And the answer is yes. He not only provided water, he provided manna, which appeared on the top of the ground in the early mornings. They were to go and collect enough for them to eat that day. Anything that was left over turned bad and became wormy. Okay? They could not carry it over. They had to use it that way. Give us this day our daily bread. And that's what God did for them. And that's what he's saying. Can God provide bread also? Not just water, but substance. Can he or will he provide meat? Will he provide meat? And the answer is yes, and he did. And every week, for some reason, a whole flock, I use the word gazillion, because we're talking about 3 million people, so that's quite a few birds that have to show up. But they would be blown in by the wind, and they would have meat. God is the provider. He is the provider. Jehovah Jireh. Jehovah Jireh. You see that. Understand that the promises he has given, he will do, because he will provide. It's what he wants to do for you and me. He wants to give you the desire of your heart. He's provided that desire in you. Now he wants to give the desire to you, not as a hope or anything, but as an actual thing, as we learn about his promises. Okay, let's take our last break and get a cup of coffee. I'll be right back.